Good morning. Welcome to church this morning. Did you have a chance to say hello to someone? Yeah, good. Okay, yeah, as Esther said, if anyone can, when you're in Tesco, just pick any extra things up for the food bank, that'd be great. And I think as a church, we can put something together as well, because it's, I guess they've just had a hard year. I mean, it's good that they've provided that service for so many people, but it also shows that, times are tough for people. So it's a double-edged thing. Right, now, always like a bit of an introductory question. Who's good with unfairness here? Who likes a bit of... When something happens to you and it's unfair, how do you feel about that? Not good. See, this is probably one of those things where hopefully there's no one that says, I just love it, when something's just unjust to me, it just really gets me going. Most of us, it's pretty universal, isn't it? When something is unfair, it just aggravates us, doesn't it? Yeah? And sometimes there can be circumstances where it feels extra unfair. See, my background's criminology. When I was doing a criminology degree, there's like an extra layer to it. When the authorities or someone in a position of power, when they do something wrong, there's like an extra level, isn't there? Have you seen videos online and maybe there's a police officer or something abusing their powers and you think, that's just something in you is like, well, that just really boils your blood. You think, well, they have no right to do that. They're meant to be protecting. Does that make sense? So it can really stir up some big emotions when something is unfair. Now, I want to look at today the book of Philemon, however you want to pronounce it. I'll probably alternate back and forth throughout the thing by accident. It's one of the shortest books of the New Testament, but it can actually conjure up so much philosophical, theological implications, and the message can be so simple, but actually really difficult to put into practice. Because essentially what we've got here is Paul is writing this letter to Philemon, who he knows. Philemon is a wealthy individual, and they think he was part of the church at Colossae where Paul set that up. And Philemon was this wealthy individual, and he was part of that church. So he was part of the faith now. Now, their culture, remember, their economy, their society was set up in a very different manner. So they had slaves and servants. And this guy was wealthy, so guess what? He had some servants. It can be pretty shocking for us to hear that, but their economy was just set up in a completely different way. And this certain servant, Onesimus, we're told he ran away. As you might think, maybe someone would in that position. He ran away. Maybe he took something as well. People would say different things. So maybe he took something and ran away. He by Philemon's point of view, he had wronged him. Even by the legal standpoint, he had wronged him. And yet he meets Onesimus. He then meets Paul later on. And he also converts to the faith. So he's got a bit of a problem to sort out now, hasn't he? See, because by law, Philemon, he can take some justice on Onesimus. But what does Paul have to say about this? Now, let me just start a little bit from the beginning, and we'll work through this together. It's a really short book, and I suggest everyone reads it in their own time in the week as well. But from verses 8 to 14, it says this: Therefore, although in Christ I could be bold and order you to do what you ought to do, yet I prefer to appeal to you on the basis of love. It is as none other than Paul, an old man, and now also a prisoner of Christ, that I appeal for my son Onesimus, who became my son while I was in chains. Formerly he was useless to you, but now he has become useful to you and to me. I am sending him, who is my very heart, back to you. I would have liked to keep him with me so that he could take your place in helping me while I am in chains for the gospel. But I did not want to do anything without your consent, so that any favor you do would not seem forced, but would be voluntary. Now, I love how he opens that. In this translation, he says, I could be bold and order you to do what should be done. Because as I said, he was their spiritual leader, I guess, and he'd set that church up. So Philemon would have had, in that context, some level of, if this is what Apostle Paul says, then I should really try and do my best to implement that. And he says, look, I'm not going to come at it from that approach. I don't want to order you to do this, but I want to talk to you, an appeal of love to work through this and to do what needs to be done. As we've said, unfairness, it gets everyone, doesn't it? No one likes injustice. I remember when we were, just a small example, we were on holiday, I think it was last year, so 2 years ago, and I don't know if I get this story wrong, but to the best of our knowledge, because we didn't speak Spanish, we don't speak Spanish, okay? And we went to a very Spanishy area. I know that sounds funny because it's all Spanish, but it wasn't really a touristy area. So there's that typical British English attitude where you expect, everyone to conform to something, but we were in an area that just wasn't particularly touristy for British people. So a lot of people would obviously speak Spanish. And we went to the beach one day, didn't we, Ken? Yeah, and I still don't know if we got the wrong end of the stick, because it does seem pretty bad. But from the experience I think we've got, I'm going to tell it anyway. So we went to the beach, and you have to get some, how have I forgot what they're called? Sunbeds. You need to get some sunbeds, don't you? And they charge for it. And it had a price on a board somewhere. And Ken was going to inquire, didn't you, Ken? You went down there and you said, oh, we need some sunbeds. We need what was it, 6 or 7, or the whole family went, and they said, oh no, you can't have them all together. They said there's a few available over here. There's 2 available all the way over there, but they were all empty. So we said, well, why can't we just take this 6, 7 here? And they're like, oh no, you can't do that. Some over here, some over there. Well, what about these ones? Like, oh no, they're for the Spanish people. And I looked around, I said, well, what's Spanish people? There's no one here. I said, no, they're reserved for the Spanish people. And at the time, I was thinking, you can't do that. Ken's a paying customer. He's paid for this. And also, I'm pretty sure there was a price increase, wasn't there? So they said, oh no, that's €7. That's for Spanish people. For you, 11. And again, I'm thinking, what? You can't do that. That's Ken's hard-earned money that's going right there. So Ken had to pay more for sunbeds that really weren't as good, were they? And they weren't in as a good position, and I think they'd put us next to the smoking area and also. So you could tell I didn't enjoy myself that at the beach that day that much. I was just thinking, what are they doing? How can they do that? That was just a really small example, but how would you react? How would you feel about that? Would you feel it was a bit odd as well? Yeah? It can be hard, can't it, when we have to deal with a situation that we're not used to. I'm used to queues. We queue here generally, don't we? In a lot of other European countries, they don't queue. In Rome, they don't queue. Me and Esther went on a holiday there and went to the supermarket to get some things, as you do, and I'm queuing up thinking, this is what you do. Guess what happens? Someone just walks straight past me, goes in front. I'm thinking, well, that's a bit rude, isn't it? When me and Esther start looking at each other like, wow, that's kind of rare. We've bumped into the rudest person in Rome. What do we do? And some more people came. Guess what? Whoop, 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 just in front. You have to learn, don't you? I'm thinking, oh right. Queuing's not as much of a thing here. When we're used to something, when we're used to a system, and then something comes against that, it can affect our worldview. And when some unfairness comes, it can be really difficult. So this story, I think reading it from right now, it can be really challenging. Because a lot of us probably wouldn't relate to Philemon and go, well, I feel bad for him. Your slave ran away. Most of us would be thinking, well, I'm not so sure about that. Because the whole worldview is different. But what we need to put into context is that from his point of view, from his society, even from a legal framework, he had been wronged, even if that doesn't feel like it to us, because it's very different. So he'd been wronged, and he had every right to order some level of punishment or consequence for this situation that had taken place. Is that okay? So we go on, and Paul has said, look, I'm not going to order you, but I want to appeal to you in love. Now, the second part of this, verses 15 to 27, perhaps the reason he was separated from you for a little while was that you might have him back forever, no longer as a slave, but better than a slave, as a dear brother. He is very dear to me, but even dearer to you, both as a fellow man and as a brother in the Lord. So if you consider me a partner, welcome him as you would welcome me. That's easy to read, but that could be quite challenging, couldn't it? Have you ever been in the workplace and you've got a good colleague base going, and or maybe yourself, and then your colleague or you become the manager or something like that? What happens? What can happen in those situations? The dynamics shift, don't they? And you'll find if you've ever been put in a position of leadership or responsibility or management for other people that you knew before that, those dynamics can be really difficult, because there's something psychological within us where we can struggle to see someone that we already know in a new role and come to those dynamics. So Philemon, he is used to Onesimus being this servant role in the house. And now Paul is saying to him, here's what I want to do. I want to send him back to you, okay? But I don't want to send him back as a servant. I want to send him back to you as a brother. How would that be received? He's got every right to be annoyed, but Paul's saying, I'm going to send him back to you, not as a servant, but as a brother. And when you look at some scholars of this passage, because there's a lot of discourse around sometimes why didn't Paul try and do more to change the way society was structured? Because we could easily look at that now and think, well, you know what, building an economy off of the servitude of other people, we wouldn't say is a good thing now. We wouldn't say it's a moral thing to do. And sometimes we can see conjecture and discourse online say, Paul, why didn't he do more? And I think some scholars, they settle on this, that really he knew he did not have the power to change the legal structure, the legal framework, the economy that it was built on. And actually some scholars would say if it had been changed quickly overnight, their whole economy would have collapsed and there would have been anarchy. Does that make sense? But what we do see from Paul right here, this is really crucial, because it's just a few lines, but what he is doing is he is trying to change hearts and minds at the grassroots level. He's trying to say, look, we might not have any say or any authority to change this legal system we're in, but what we can do is change the way we interact with each other. Legally, Onesimus might be your servant, but you don't need to treat him like that. You can treat him as a brother, because he is with you in Christ. Does that make sense? And this is a huge thing, because we see this again and again in the New Testament with Paul trying to set these churches up. He's trying to bring a new culture, a kingdom culture that may look different to the world around it. In fact, it almost certainly does look different to the world around it. And when you look at the cultures of the day, both in the Greek context and the Jewish context, they were very different. And particularly in the Greek context, it was called an upward bound race for honors. That is, I've mentioned that before here, that is how society functioned. That is what people cared about. It was all about increasing your own status. That was the goal. Whether it was spoken or not, that was the goal. And I think in some way, we can see that still applies a little bit, doesn't it? I think thankfully we've had a lot of change, and there's a lot more fairness in many ways, but when you come down to it, a lot of people, the key thing for them, it still boils down to, how do I increase my status? And there might not be anything inherently wrong with that to an extent. People, it's good for people to be ambitious, things like that, but at the heart of it, what is that built on? Because Paul was trying to say, I want to present a new kingdom, a new culture, that when you come into the church, it may feel different, because the culture here needs to represent the culture of heaven. As we've used this example before, but embassies are so interesting legally, because when you are in a foreign country, or even in this country, if you go to an embassy of another country, what happens legally? You are protected, because you are regarded as now being in the territory of that other nation. So you could just, if they let you could be in London and just wander into another country's embassy right there in London. And legally, the police cannot come in and get you, because you are regarded as being under the territory of another nation. Isn't that interesting? I mean, you see why you end up with strange legal situations sometimes, where people try and hide in there. And I'm not advocating that we do that, but I think it's an interesting legal point that when we look at that term through that lens, churches in a way are meant to represent an embassy of heaven. We know the earth we live in is not the finished result. It's not the end result, that there is a kingdom of heaven, a restored earth to come. But on some level, Paul is trying to create this idea that when you are in a church, it is an embassy of heaven. It is a representation, just a brief glimpse of heaven. And within that embassy, that church, the customs may be different. The culture may be different. The rules may be different, because it's supposed to come from the place of heaven, not from earth. Does that make sense? Now, I know I'm laboring this, but it's really important that as a Christian, as a Christ follower, we let this stuff grow in our hearts, because Paul is saying here, look, I don't have the power to change the system, and maybe that wouldn't even be the right thing to do, but hearts and minds matter. We have, the only control we really have is how we react to situations, isn't it? There's so much stuff that happens in the world, in our lives, personally or internationally or locally. There's so much stuff that happens that we just have no control over. But the only thing we can do is control how we react to something. With our heart, with our mind, how can we react? And how can I bring a little bit of Christ into that situation, even if it means insignificant, even if it's just at this grassroots level? So he's asking Philemon to do that. Now, last point with this. In verses, let's go start from 18. If he has done you any wrong or owes you anything, charge it to me. I, Paul, am writing this with my own hand. I will pay it back. Not to mention that you owe me your very self. I do not wish, brother, that I may have some benefit from you in the Lord. Refresh my heart in Christ. Confident of your obedience, I write to you, knowing that you will do even more than I ask. So I love this. He's bringing in some substitution atonement, isn't he? He's making a picture of Christ right here. If he has done you any wrong or owes you anything, charge it to me. Because isn't that just such a picture of Christ? That he's just set, the previous verses, he's set an equality. He said that when you come to Christ, we are all equal. That at that point, no life is worth more than another. Maybe society is structured in a way that gives more value to some people than to others. Maybe the law can be, but Paul says when you come to Christ, we are all in him. There is neither slave nor free. And then he goes on to say, if he's done you any wrong, pay it to me. Whatever he's taken from you, whatever it has cost you, I'll pay for it. I'll pay the price. And of course, the ultimate example is Christ, because is that not what he did for humanity? When he was interceding for us, said these people, these fallen beings, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. Anything that they have cost you, I will pay the price. The price of sin, I will pay for it. Whatever it costs, I will pay for it. And so we know a core part of Christian theology is that we can get fixated on the terminology, but none of us are perfect, which means we've all been in sin, or we all are in sin. Does that make sense? Because that simply means to miss the mark. And sometimes these scary old-fashioned words can get people all lost, but it simply means we have all missed the mark. That when we compare ourselves to the standard of perfection, none of us actually measure up to that. But the amazing thing is that that's okay, because we do not need to pay the price. Jesus says, I will pay that price for you. Whatever the cost is, whatever wrong there has been, I will pay that price. And we know it created this heavenly covenant, this heavenly contract on the cross that we've sang this morning. That death was defeated. The true death, the eternal death was defeated. That the gates of hell, the power of sin, has no long-term hold on us. That even if we live right now in this fallen world, we are in his kingdom. We're in his embassy. And ultimately, that is where we will make our home. Isn't that amazing? That there is such equality in that none of us can claim it in our own right, but it's through his strength, through his sacrifice, through his gift that we're all here. And I just wonder how could we be vessels to keep passing that message on? Whether in a direct or indirect way. Paul he's being a harbinger of this message. He is living that message. He is doing the same thing. Whatever he's done to you, I'll pay for it. And you know what? Life can be complicated. Life can be tough. There's no simple way to just take this story and infuse it into any and every situation in life. But there is some philosophical, some theological principles and frameworks here that can be put in some parts of our life, and that can make a real difference. See, injustice, it sucks. We all dislike it. And we do believe that there is a day coming where God will sort all of this out. Some of it gets sorted out now. Some of it gets sorted out in the new age, in the restored earth, the kingdom to come. But what we can do is, how can we bring that message to people right now? We're going to go into communion in a moment, and it's just a great time to focus on your own heart, focus on where you are with God, and know that if there's anything you just need to leave at the foot of the cross, that you can do that. If there's anything that needs sorting out between you and God, then he will be there for you to do that he has paid that price. But also at the same time, is there any situations where, like Philemon, we just need to actually, I have a right to bear this injustice, but perhaps the best thing is to let that go. Even though it is my right to take action there, maybe it is better for me to let it go. Maybe Jesus doesn't want to command us right now this morning, use his authority as the God of everything. But maybe through an appeal of love, what can I let go this morning?